I was sitting at my usual cafe when the text came, "Don't come back." No explanation, no period, just a sentence as cold as the marble table beneath my fingers. My name is Madison. I'd spent 12 months closing a $3 million deal, and I had just been fired on my day off. Have you ever been abandoned at the exact moment you thought you were about to step into your biggest breakthrough? If you have, stay with me till the end. This story might be the voice you've never dared to give your pain. I looked away from the screen, my gaze falling on the unfinished swirl of cream in my coffee. For the first time in my life, I felt like a blank space in the contract I'd helped write. 3 years of building that client relationship from scratch, 12 months of tense negotiation, 6 weeks of fine-tuning every clause like I was chiseling stone. I was the lead. I had been there since day one, when the client still doubted our capacity. And now, just before signing, I was erased. No warning, no thank you, no goodbye, just one text: "Don't come back." I sat frozen, spoon tapping against someone else's cup, echoing like a metronome to a day I couldn't process. The cafe clock ticked on, uncaring of the quiet collapse inside my chest. I thought about calling someone. But who? And why? I'd learned how not to cry in public, so I just pushed the coffee away, far enough that I wouldn't see my reflection in it anymore. My mind kept circling the same question. Why? Why today? Why now, on the eve of the biggest deal I've ever closed? Why didn't anyone speak to me? No meeting, no heads up, not even a whisper. I checked my inbox again. Nothing. I was still listed as the lead presenter for next week's press conference. Everything looked like I was still in the picture. Except I wasn't. I placed my hand on the leather briefcase that had followed me for years, the one with the worn edges and broken clasp. Inside was the contract I'd sculpted line by line, number by number. Inside was every ounce of belief I carried to work each day. Now? There was no point opening it. I stepped outside. The sky was still blue, but inside me, it felt like I'd just walked through a storm no one else could see. My phone buzzed again. I didn't look. I didn't need to. It wouldn't be an apology. And in that moment, something crystallized. Betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the one who once trusted you with their dreams. I used to think loyalty would be rewarded with opportunity. But when I looked back, what had those 10 years really been? I didn't go home right away. I walked. Not with purpose, just forward. My feet knew the city's corners better than I did. Same streets I'd crossed late at night after client dinners. Same sidewalks where I'd rehearsed pitches under my breath before meetings that would shape entire quarters. This wasn't just a job. It was the frame I built my life around. And now, I was pacing through it like a ghost in my own story. I ended up outside the building, not the company's new glass fortress, but the old office where it all began. Smaller, uglier. But it held something the new one never did: memory without pretense. I stood across the street and watched. 3rd floor, 2nd window from the left. That was my first desk. I could still see the faint glow of those early mornings. The string lights I hung on the whiteboard to make the place feel like something more than just work. It was where I first stayed till midnight, not because anyone asked, but because I wanted to prove I was worth betting on. Back then, I didn't ask for raises. I asked for responsibility, and they gave it to me until I became invisible inside it. They used to say my name with pride. Somewhere along the way, it turned into utility. I reached into my bag and pulled out an old achievement plaque, still tucked away in a side pocket. Q1 star contributor, Madison Lane. It was chipped at the corner, and the gold lettering had dulled. But I remember the day they gave it to me. I remember the pride. I remember believing it meant I was safe. I was wrong. I was never safe. I was just useful, until someone decided they'd found a newer version of me, more convenient to control. That realization didn't arrive like a hammer. It seeped in, quiet, cold, undeniable. I had kept showing up, even when they started leaving me out of strategy meetings. I told myself I was tired, maybe slipping behind. Maybe it was fair. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd win them back with results. But results don't matter when someone's already rewritten the story with you, no longer in it. I clutched the briefcase tighter, the same one I carried on the day I flew to Chicago alone to rescue a failing deal. The day I turned a dying prospect into a 3-year retainer. No one from the team came with me. I did it alone. I closed it. Alone. I used to think those moments were building blocks towards something greater. Now I see they were my quiet audition tapes for a part I was never going to be cast in. And yet, a part of me still wanted to believe, still hoped there was a mistake, a misunderstanding, a call coming to explain everything, but the phone stayed silent. I stood there for a long time, watching a building that had moved on from me before I even left. Somewhere between trying harder and waiting longer, I stopped being included. Not because I wasn't enough, but because they never intended to keep me in the room. I noticed it first in the smallest ways. An internal meeting popped up on everyone's calendar, but not mine. I thought it was a glitch. I forwarded the invite to myself and showed up anyway. No one looked surprised I was there. No one looked at all. Then came the team briefing, where each name was read out by role. I waited for mine. "Madeline," they said. "Not Madison." I corrected it, softly. The speaker didn't even blink, just nodded as if I was interrupting something more important. That week, my name disappeared from the resource board outside the war room. The board that once had my initials on every major account now had space where I used to be. No explanation, no red pen, just absence. Absence is louder than rejection when it happens quietly. I told myself not to overreact. People make mistakes. Admins forget. Maybe it wasn't personal, but forgetting someone's name isn't just a slip when you've worked 10 years next to them. And leaving them off an invite isn't just an accident when you've led every negotiation until now. Something was shifting. Not suddenly, but deliberately. I was being edited out. Slowly, like I was a note in a melody someone no longer wanted to hear. One afternoon, I passed by the strategy meeting room. I heard my project being discussed. The new intern was presenting my deck, my slides, my language, and no one in that room looked like they missed me. I didn't walk in, I didn't say a word. I just stood there, hand tightening around the coffee I didn't plan to drink. It was still warm, but I already knew I wasn't. I walked to the restroom, locked myself in a stall. Not to cry, I just needed the silence. That's the thing about workplace exile. It doesn't come with memos or pink slips. It comes with vanishing acts, meetings you're no longer in, projects reassigned without notice, eyes that slide past you like you're furniture that used to matter. And I started to question myself. Was I slipping? Had I become too quiet? Too difficult to manage? Was I no longer needed? That last question sank the deepest, because I had always believed competence was armor, that if I worked hard enough, no one could ever make me irrelevant. But it wasn't about competence. It was about power, and power doesn't always fire you. Sometimes it just stops seeing you. Have you ever felt like the only person still trying, in a place that stopped looking at you a long time ago? I didn't think I was the only one who ever sat in a familiar room and felt like I'd disappeared. What about you? I began reading every email twice. Not for typos, but for signs, for clues that I wasn't just imagining it. And what I found next proved everything I feared. I started reading emails like they were crime scenes. Every line, every CC, every word that didn't include me, or worse, intentionally skipped me. I stopped assuming it was accidental, because I wasn't just missing meetings, I was being removed, surgically, quietly. There was one thread in particular, A logistics update for the big client presentation. My name had always been the first in every draft. This time, it wasn't even there. Not at the top, not in the body, not in the CC. But when I clicked Show History, I saw something. My name had been deleted. Not ignored. Deleted. I stared at the screen for a long time. I wasn't angry, not yet. Just still. Like when the elevator stops one floor too early and the silence feels off. That night, I opened my old project folders. The ones with versions, revisions, voice notes I'd made at 2A. I clicked through them like a person searching for proof they once mattered. My voice was still there. In the details. The slide titles. The client insights I'd fought to add. I hadn't imagined it. I had built all of this, and someone was actively dismantling my place in it. I opened a new folder. Named it. For later. I didn't know why I called it that. Not yet. But somewhere deep inside, something was shifting. I was still too stunned to fight, but no longer too naive to watch. The next morning, I arrived early. Earlier than anyone else. I walked past the glass conference room. The chairs were already set. Except for one. The seat at the head of the table. Mine. Or, what used to be mine. That chair stayed empty all day. No one sat there, no one looked at it. As if removing me had left a shadow they weren't ready to fill. I found an excuse to check the master schedule in HR's shared drive. It had been updated. My name was replaced with someone else's. A new hire. Younger, less experienced, but easier. Easier to manage. Easier to mold. I couldn't stop staring at the digital calendar. How casually it happened, like moving a block from one row to another. Like rearranging furniture. Like erasing a person's legacy was just an admin task done before lunch. I walked to the restroom again. Same mirror, same face. But I didn't feel like Madison anymore. I felt like a version of her I didn't recognize, still dressed for a fight no one else acknowledged. My reflection blinked back at me, expressionless. That's when I noticed the name tag on my ID badge was slightly smudged, as if the print itself had started to fade. Like the company had already begun the process of letting me go, starting with ink. And still I said nothing. Not out of fear, not even hurt. Out of calculation, something about being excluded, so thoroughly, so intentionally, burned through the fog. I wasn't just being replaced, I was being silenced. But here's the thing no one tells you. Silence is a skill, not a surrender. I started watching how others moved. Who copied whom? Who whispered just before meetings? Who stood a little too confidently in rooms they hadn't earned the right to speak in? And then it hit me. They weren't just moving on without me. They were preparing to replace me before the contract was even signed. Before the win was secured. Before the credit could be claimed. I had been used to build the runway, and they planned to take off without me. That's when I knew. I couldn't wait for anyone to explain. I had to start saving everything. Not for revenge. Not yet. But because no one else was going to tell my side of the story. I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. But I started keeping records. Every meeting I wasn't invited to. Every file I was suddenly removed from. Every presentation repackaged with someone else's name on it. I didn't yell. I didn't protest. I saved. I opened a private folder deep inside my personal cloud drive. I called it Later. And I meant it. Each day after work, I would sit at my kitchen counter, pour tea that always went cold, and scroll back through emails, not just mine. Threads I was forwarded, messages I was copied in by mistake, team updates I wasn't supposed to see but did. I screen captured, downloaded, archived, not because I wanted to hurt anyone, because I needed to remember what they were trying to erase. One night, I found it. A single-line message buried inside a forwarded string of updates. Once the contract is signed, let's make the full handover. Madison's role is no longer needed. They wrote it 3 days before they told me not to come back. They never intended to keep me once the deal closed. They just needed my name, my face, until the client signed. And then, they planned to cut me out like I was a temporary file. I read that line 5 times. I didn't cry. I opened a drawer, pulled out an old USB drive, a gift from a client I'd saved years ago, engraved with my initials. I transferred everything, every contract version, every proof of authorship. My call logs, voice notes, timestamps, backup copies of internal reports with my digital signature. It wasn't revenge, it was preservation. Of my worth, of the truth, of who I had been in that company before they rewrote my story. The next day, I sat at my desk and did something I hadn't done in months. I took out my leather-bound notebook, the one I'd locked away since the last reorg. On the front page, I had written, "Things I would say if I wasn't afraid of losing everything." That day, I wrote again. But this time, the title changed. It now read, "Things I know now that no one else wants written down." I noticed how people flinched when I started showing up to meetings again, quiet, composed, and taking notes. They whispered more, smiled less, because silence from a woman who's always spoken is passive. But silence from a woman who has been erased? That's strategy. I kept my tone neutral, my expressions unreadable. I greeted people the same way they had greeted my absence, with polite disinterest. They didn't know what I had seen, what I had saved, what I was building in silence. But I did. And every time someone looked past me, I reminded myself of that line. Madison's role is no longer needed. It didn't sting anymore. It clarified. I was no longer needed by them, but I had never needed them to define me. That week, I started waking up earlier, not to get ahead of emails, to get ahead of my next chapter. I made a list of every client I had brought in over the last 4 years. I cross-referenced who I had personal rapport with, who I'd taken to dinner, who I'd coached through renewal negotiations, who had texted me directly for updates instead of going through official channels. I wasn't collecting names for war. I was remembering who still saw me. And when I finally turned off my work laptop for the last time, I didn't shut it in anger. I simply reached for my phone and made the first call that would change everything. I didn't give notice. I gave absence. I stopped replying to internal threads. I didn't chase updates. I let meetings happen without me. I started treating my job like they had treated my presence. Expendable. The truth is, when you stop reacting, the silence becomes unbearable to those who expect you to beg. On Monday morning, I left my company badge on the front desk. No note, no drama. I shut down my laptop and left it unplugged in the corner of my apartment. Not broken, not retired, just finished. They didn't deserve my exit email. They didn't deserve closure. Closure, after all, is something you give to people who mattered. They'd proven I didn't. Then I made the call. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Madison? That voice. Warm. Real. The kind that remembered how I took my coffee and which page I always flipped to first in a pitch. It was Carla Rivera, senior partner at one of our top-tier accounts, a woman I had spent months mentoring during her onboarding, long before our firms officially worked together. I didn't start with complaints. I didn't even say I was leaving. I started with one sentence. I think you deserve to know who's really been running your deal these last 12 months. The line went quiet. Then she said, "Talk to me." So I did. I didn't trash the company. I didn't name-drop executives. I just told her the truth. What had been promised, what had been delivered, what had been staged. I told her where the gaps were in the current rollout plan. I told her what I had done, quietly, to make her team's KPIs hit green month after month, even when they didn't know I was the one patching things up. She didn't ask why I was saying all this. She knew. Before we hung up, she said, "If you're ever building something of your own, call me first." That was the beginning of the end, for them. But the beginning of something else for me. I bought a new notebook, black cover, unbranded. I wrote one name on the first page, Carla Rivera. Then I wrote 6 more. Clients I had helped rescue, projects I had turned around, accounts I had grown from $20K to $2. Each one came with a contact, a relationship, a result that wasn't luck, it was me. They didn't take my job from me. They freed me from a ceiling they were too afraid I'd break through. 3 days after my silent exit, I received an email. Subject: Need to confirm Madison's status? I didn't open it. Didn't need to. When you're no longer visible in a system that once relied on you quietly, panic starts to speak for you. They called twice that week. I didn't answer. I was busy registering my LLC. No brand name, just initials, just space. For once, it was mine. I didn't have a big plan yet. I didn't need one. I just needed one thing: to no longer shrink so others could feel big. I moved the later folder onto a secure drive. I deleted the company's name from every file. I renamed the folder Proof of Process. It wasn't blackmail, it was legacy, mine. That Friday, as the sun dipped through the window of my living room, I sat with a glass of wine I didn't toast. Not because I was alone, but because I didn't need witnesses to know I'd won. If the person who once looked down on you suddenly has to call for help, would you answer? I didn't, and I don't regret it. What about you? By Monday, the calls turned frantic. Not to ask where I went, but to ask if the client was still with them. It started with a missed call, then 2, then 8. By Monday evening, I had 48 missed calls from 6 different numbers, none saved in my contacts, but I didn't need caller ID to know who they were. Panic doesn't hide well, especially from those who once fed on your silence. That morning, the client I'd spoken to, Carla, had emailed their C-suite and excluded the agency from the CC line. Subject: Concerns about recent shifts in project oversight. That phrase alone was enough to crack the surface. But the body of the email? It was everything. She listed discrepancies, delays, unexpected changes in deliverables, and she asked one question, bolded. Can someone clarify why Madison Lane is no longer the point of contact? That question hit like a blade against glass, not because of what it said, but because of who said it. And suddenly, the people who thought they had quietly erased me had to answer for my absence, out loud, in writing, and with witnesses. The same executives who once smiled when I was called just operations were now scrambling to explain how the deal got through the door in the first place. And the problem? They couldn't. Because the person who knew the door codes had already left the building. I didn't respond to any of their calls, but I checked the agency's public-facing metrics, something I'd never done before. The new dashboard had gone live that day. Client retention, 17%. NPS score dropped 2. 4 points campaign delay, plus 6 days engagement ROI, red. I almost felt sorry for them, almost. But then I remembered the meeting where they took my name off the leadership deck and told the team I was transitioning into a different scope. No one asked what that scope was. No one asked if I had agreed. Now they were the ones trying to scope out the damage, with no map. I heard through a friend in HR, who owed me more than one late-night vent session, that there had been an emergency meeting. Client-facing escalation, they called it. Except it wasn't a crisis. Until I walked away. I wasn't there. And yet, somehow, every word being spoken was about me. That's power. But what satisfied me most wasn't the collapse. It was the confusion. The way no one could track what I was doing, who I was talking to, or what I knew. They had underestimated me so long, they'd stopped watching me altogether. And now? Now I was off the radar, but under their skin. I sat at a park bench that afternoon, watching a little boy try to fly a paper airplane that kept folding midair. He looked frustrated, almost ready to give up, until a gust of wind caught the paper just right and carried it. It was clumsy, imperfect, but it flew. That's what this moment felt like. Not a perfect retaliation, but momentum, a quiet lift, just enough to let them know. Madison Lane wasn't disposable, and while they scrambled to contain the fallout, I sat at home with my notebook open, sketching a plan. Not to go back, but to build something where no one could erase me again. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not my parents, not even the colleague who once said, "If you ever leave, take me with you." Because this time, I wasn't leaving. I was building, and I didn't need applause for laying the first brick. My mornings became quieter. I no longer rushed through traffic or rehearsed client updates during red lights. I brewed my own coffee, poured it into a plain white mug, and sat in the sunlight, something I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. The first thing I did? I bought a new notebook. No logo, no taglines, no borrowed identity. Just my name, written in fine ink across the first page, built from the silence. The second thing? I listed every client I wanted to keep, not for money, but for mutual respect. People who asked for me by name. People who thanked me after meetings. People who looked me in the eye, not through me. That list only had 5 names, and that was enough. I reached out with a simple email. I'm building something new. It'll be quiet, precise, and personal. If you'd like to be part of it, I'll send details soon. If not, I want to thank you for the chapter we shared. 4 of the 5 replied within 24 hours. Each message ended the same way. Let me know how I can support you. That evening, I opened my laptop. The screen lit up like it had been waiting. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel watched. I wasn't editing for approval. I wasn't presenting to impress. I was planning for clarity, for continuity, for myself. I created a new folder, ML Strategy Group. Inside it, I uploaded case studies I had written alone at 2 a.m., slide decks no one credited me for, frameworks I had built from scratch, insights I had lived, not Googled. This wasn't just material, it was proof of thinking, and no one could strip my name from it this time. I called a friend who worked in legal, asked her about forming an LLC. She offered to draft the paperwork. "Just give me a name," she said. I paused for a long time, and then I said it. No name. Because the work would speak first. The identity could come later. By the end of the week, I had a workspace. Not a fancy office, not some co-working subscription, just a table in the corner of my apartment, with a view of the city I once served from behind someone else's curtain. And on that table, a sauté de moi opened to a page that said Day 1. A cup of tea I actually finished, and my old USB, now free of logos, labeled only Real. For the first time in my professional life, I wasn't performing. I was present. I didn't need a title. I didn't need a podium. I just needed this stillness, this unshakable clarity that I had everything I needed and nothing I didn't. They had taken my seat at the table, so I built a table where I didn't have to ask for one. And just when I thought the past had finally gone quiet, an email arrived. Not from a client, but from them. And this time, they were the ones asking for a meeting. The email arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Subject: Let's reconnect. No salutation, no apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened. Just 7 words in the body. We'd love to discuss a potential collaboration. I stared at the screen for a moment, not out of shock, just study. The sender? My former manager, the same one who forgot to include me in the final presentation, the same one who said I was too emotional for executive leadership in a room I wasn't even invited into. Now, suddenly, he wanted to reconnect. I didn't respond right away. I let the email sit, unread, unimportant. Instead, I went for a walk. There's something sacred about mid-afternoon light in early spring, how it casts gold across sidewalks and makes even the tiredest corners feel like possibility. I walked without headphones, no music, no podcasts, just the sound of my shoes hitting pavement and the occasional rustle of a breeze that seemed to say, "You don't owe them anything," and I didn't. When I got back, there was another message, this time from HR. A formal email titled, "Request for Exit Clarification." Apparently, my departure had caused confusion across multiple departments. They wanted to know if I'd consider a conversation to align future possibilities. Future possibilities! Funny how silence makes people realize your value faster than a decade of loyalty. I opened the email, not to reply, just to read the signature. The name of the director of people had changed. A woman I'd once mentored. I remember coaching her through a client escalation once, staying late to help her rewrite her apology email 3 times until it was perfect. Now she was asking if I wanted to come home, but I was already home, and it didn't have their logo on the door. Still, I wrote something. Not to them, to myself. On the second page of my new notebook, I scribbled, "When they finally come back for your fire, make sure they only find the smoke." I never replied to the first email, but I did send something to the HR rep. A single sentence. "I appreciate the outreach, but I've already closed that chapter, with peace." No punctuation at the end, like the text they sent me weeks ago. Only this time, I was the one who didn't need closure. 2 days later, a letter arrived by post. Thick envelope, cream paper, no return address. Inside, a note signed by the CEO, or formerly the CEO. Apparently, he'd stepped down last week. Quietly. The letter didn't mention it, but the title beneath his name was blank. Just his name, followed by nothing. Not CEO, not president. Just a name. Detached. Like he no longer belonged to the system he'd once controlled. He thanked me, said I was instrumental, said he regretted how things unfolded. I folded the letter once, then twice, then a third time, and placed it at the back of my drawer. Right next to my old name badge. Faded, smudged, irrelevant. That night, I sat by my window, wine in hand, lights off, just watching the city live without me in the chaos of it. And for the first time, I didn't feel erased. I felt invisible by choice. Unreachable. Unavailable. Unbothered. I didn't go back, not because I was angry, but because I had already given enough to people who never saw me. I didn't retaliate. I just stopped offering value where it wasn't honored. Have you ever done that? Walked away not to prove a point, but to protect your peace? I didn't respond. I didn't return. But I did do one thing. I changed the picture above my desk, removed the company photo, replaced it with a screenshot of my call log. 48 missed calls. None answered. I didn't need to burn bridges. They crumbled on their own. The week after the letter arrived, my old agency took down its homepage banner. The case study I had written, the one with my name originally on the slides, was quietly removed. So was the Meet Our Team page. Even the leadership bios were changed. Shorter, more generic, more hollow. You could feel the absence before you even knew what you were missing. I took a screenshot of it, not for evidence, just as a reminder that even the most polished facades erode when the foundation leaves quietly. That same day, I replaced the framed photo above my desk. It used to be a team picture, taken after our biggest campaign win, the one they cropped me out of for the website. I took it down without a word, put up a clean print, a screenshot of my call log, 48 missed calls. Underneath, in small script, I wrote, "You wanted silence. Now you have it." I didn't delete their emails. I just moved them to a folder called Expired. No need for revenge, just records, just clarity. That Friday, I visited the old building one last time, not to go in, just to walk past. It was late afternoon, the kind of dusk that softens everything. A new intern was standing outside, looking lost, holding a stack of binders. No one came to help, and for a moment, I saw myself, 10 years earlier, waiting outside, trying to make a name without making noise, and I whispered something, not to her, but to the version of me still standing there in memory. You don't need their hallways to be great. Back home, I opened my notebook to a blank page, and I wrote a single sentence. When you remove the person who held it all together, watch what comes undone. I didn't need credit anymore. I had history, not in headlines, in memory, in moments. In the way my absence now echoed louder than my presence ever did. A friend from inside messaged me on LinkedIn. They're collapsing from the inside. Everyone's just waiting for someone to say it out loud. I didn't reply to me because some truths don't need to be echoed. They just need to be witnessed. The next day, I took down the last trace of the company from my apartment. A branded pen I never liked, a certificate I once framed, a lanyard still hanging near the door. I placed them in a drawer, closed it softly, not with bitterness, but with respect for what I'd survived. And then I changed something else. The way I introduced myself, not, I used to work at, not, I led strategy for. Now it was simple. I'm Madison. I work for myself. No further explanation. Because power no longer meant proving. It meant knowing. And while they scrambled to cover the cracks kept widening. Because the thing about ghosting someone who built the walls is that when she leaves, the walls don't hold. It didn't happen with a bang. It happened in emails that bounced back, in internal dashboards that stopped loading, in whispers that turned into resignations. The agency I had once built my life around began to split from the inside. Not all at once, but steadily, predictably, like a dam giving way after years of ignored pressure. The first crack was the resignation of the lead HR director, the one who had ghosted my exit paperwork. She didn't send a farewell email. She didn't even update her LinkedIn. She just disappeared. Word got out that her inbox was locked before noon. Then came the client exodus, one after another, quiet and clinical. The company tried to control the narrative, called it realignment, strategic transitions, market reshuffling. But everyone inside knew the truth. The core had hollowed out. They had spent too long grooming faces for the front page, and forgot the hands that kept the whole system running. A friend from finance texted me late one night. You were the glue, and now everything's falling apart. I didn't reply. I just looked around my apartment, lit only by the soft lamp by my desk. On the wall was a sticky note I hadn't taken down in weeks. It read, "Not everyone who walks away is lost." The following Monday, the agency's website went down for 6 hours. When it came back online, the color palette had changed. The logo was different, smaller, safer, like they were trying to forget what they used to be, by pretending they never were. But they couldn't erase the archive. Their press mentions were thinning, their awards pages untouched since I left, their tone off, unmoored. Someone posted anonymously on an industry forum. They're bleeding from every department. No leadership, no culture, just chaos. It got reshared dozens of times. The comment that received the most likes? This is what happens when you remove the wrong person. I didn't gloat. I didn't post cryptic quotes. I didn't say, I told you so. I just watched. And when the final confirmation came, a quarterly earnings report that tanked, I closed the tab and exhaled. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just truth. That day, I received a message request from a junior strategist who had once been told, "You should follow Madison's pace." She wrote, "I didn't understand back then what you were protecting, but now I do. I'm leaving too. Thank you for showing us it's okay to walk away." I stared at that message for a long time, not because it surprised me, but because I realized something. What I thought was the end of me had become someone else's permission to begin. Back in my apartment, I pulled out my last artifact, a framed copy of the company's first mission statement. It had been gifted to me in my 5th year. I turned it over. On the back, I wrote in permanent ink, "Removed quietly, remembered completely." Then I slid it under my bed, face down. I didn't need to see it again, but I needed to own how it ended. And just like that, there was nothing left to burn. No more updates, no more whispers, only one final step. And I was going to take it, alone. I didn't leave with noise. I left with a match. One I lit not in rage, but in release. It was a Sunday evening when I decided it was time. The sun was low, the city was quiet, and my apartment was clean, almost too clean, like it knew something final was about to happen. I took out the last drawer from the corner cabinet. Inside were the last 3 things I'd kept from my old life. My employee badge, a branded notebook, and the card they'd all signed after my promotion that never came. I stepped onto the balcony, lit a single candle, held the badge over the flame. At first, the plastic curled, then cracked. The smell was sharp, artificial, just like the roll had become. I didn't flinch. I let it burn until only the metal clasp remained. Then I dropped it into a small bowl of water, watched the steam rise and vanish into the dusk. Back inside, I poured a glass of red wine. Not to celebrate, to mark something. The end of giving my brilliance to people who only saw it when it was gone. I sat in silence for a while. No music, no talking, just me and the sound of the glass settling on the table. And I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not even hurt, just done. Done being underestimated. Done shrinking to fit. Done waiting for acknowledgement that I had already outgrown. I opened the window, let the evening air move through the room like a cleansing. Every trace of that old company was gone now. No mugs, no folders, no habits. I'd even changed my morning routine. No more checking emails before sunrise. No more logging into systems I no longer believed in. No more apologizing for being the one who always saw 5 steps ahead. I walked to the shelf and picked up the notebook. The new one, flipped to the last page, wrote one final line. This time, I don't rise to prove them wrong. I rise because I finally believe I was never wrong to begin with. Then I closed the book, placed it in a drawer, and turned off the lamp. No spotlight, no audience, just peace. Outside, the city kept breathing. Somewhere, maybe, someone was still trying to edit my name out of a report. Still trying to explain away a loss they didn't see coming, still pretending I didn't matter. But I wasn't there to correct them. I was somewhere better. Not ahead, not behind, but exactly where I was always meant to be when I stopped asking to belong. They thought silence meant surrender, but silence was my signal to begin again. If you've ever been made to feel invisible, but knew your worth didn't need an audience, leave me a dot. Just one. I'll read them all, quietly, but with everything I've become,